I guess it'll be 10 years ago this coming October with my wife and explored the city. It was great, right? We had a lot of fun, ate Pips Donuts and had some good coffee and went to Pals and was just like, this is fun. But left here going, no, I'm not going to Portland. Then we started seeking the Lord, praying. By the end of that year, God clearly wants us in Portland.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Again, welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left podcast. My name is Tim Osborn, and I get to be here with
Pete Armstrong. It's great to be back. We're at my church here in the podcast studio, and today, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but there's this soothing rain. It's pouring rain.
So if we fall asleep,
April 10th. Oh, it's just so peaceful. Nice to be here.
April.
Yeah. And our special guest is Matt Boyd.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, church planner here in Portland for the last 8 years. And
8 long years.
We are excited to introduce you to him and hear his story and what he's learned along the way. And hope it's an encouragement and a challenge to people serving here, people thinking about serving here, all those sorts of things.
Amen. Matt, we're so glad to have you. Finally get to sit down with you.
Thanks for having me.
We would love to just start with kind of tell us your story, and we'll let you kind of define what that is, but we just want to get to know you. So kind of tell us your story a bit, and then we'll jump into Portland specific stuff. But
well, thanks for having me. I've listened to some of the episodes of the podcast, and so I am from North Carolina originally. It's where I was born and raised, born in the Raleigh area, grew up in the Charlotte area. Have you been to North Carolina before?
I have, yes.
Yeah, but you said you have not.
I have
been
not,
there
yeah.
So I was born and raised in that area, went to college down at the coast of North Carolina. I grew up in church, had a great upbringing. Was kind of like Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, very traditional, always there, but definitely came to a point in my life where I was like, is this real? You know, made it my own, really just sought after God and eventually came to the realization that this is real. Yeah. I think I was influenced much later by Tim Keller, but it was very much did the resurrection actually happen? And if it did, then this thing actually changes everything. Sought the Lord, went on this journey. Later, kind of rebellious years, still went through some of that, even though as one who was following the Lord. And then just remember seeking, what does he want me to do with my life, God? Just had this really strong sense of a calling, vocation. That gets overused today, but that's really what sustained me through a lot of trials over the years. It's going back to that moment of going like, God, what do you want me to do? And just sensing ministry and this calling on my life, not knowing what that looked like, not knowing what that would entail. Went to college and did not go to a Bible college.
So was that in like high school?
That was in high school.
So you had that clarity?
I had that clarity in high school.
Great.
But my clarity, and I'll weave this in with some of the calling piece, was, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And then I would tell God what I was going to do. Kind of like, let me do you the favor. Here's the blank check, but I'll go ahead and fill it out for you.
Nice.
And so I had gone to a Christian high school, and you would think, okay, you're called to ministry, you're going to go to a Bible college. I wanted nothing to do with that. I knew that I was rebellious enough that it would probably make me go the other way. So I went to the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, which is the school you go to if you can't get into UNC Chapel Hill, the more familiar school. It's a party school. That's not why I went there. But when I tell people I went there, like, oh, party school, right? And I'm like, that's not why I went there. But I went there. It's really close to the beach. Great place to go to college. Got a degree in communications with a focus on marketing and public relations. During my college years, I took a trip, my first trip out of the country, to Argentina. And I
know where this is heading.
Yes, you know where this is heading. So I did not feel called to missions or be a missionary in the sense that people use the term. And I said, I can go and be miserable. My friends kept trying to get me to go. So I finally went to Argentina, and God just opened my eyes and my heart to this much bigger world and mission of it's a lot bigger than the world where you grew up. We were helping in children's feeding centers, and we were helping with some ministry. Kind of your traditional evangelistic campaigns were happening in a city. Okay. I met, who is now my wife, on that trip. Nothing happened on the first trip, but fast forward, I went back a year later. Okay. I was dating someone when I met her and ended that relationship, went back, and 3 weeks into a 2-month internship, we started dating. And my wife asked me 3 questions we started dating. It was, first question she asked me was, do you love me? This is before we were officially dating. And so in faith, I said yes. And I was 19 at the time. I met her at 18. Then we went across the street and called my parents from a little phone booth. And, you know, they just sent me their 19-year-old son on a mission trip. And I remember in this phone booth, squeezed in together, and, you know, the butterflies and all of my parents, hello. And hey, I don't even know what time it is in North Carolina at this point. Just saying, hey, I just told Andrea, and they were like, who's Andrea? And I told her I loved her, and we're getting married, and they silence on the other end of the line, just like, what in the world? And so then she asked me my views on divorce, because she just said American Christians were very known to flippantly get divorced. And then she said, are you willing to go to India? Because she had always felt this strong call to go to India. And so I always tell people, if I hadn't gone to Argentina, I would never gone to India, because that ends up being part of our story. Fast forward a couple of years later, we get married. So we didn't get married right away, but I dated all through college. Although I did get legally married on my Christmas break of my my senior year of college. And then I went back and I was in college and living as a single guy. And so people are like, what'd you do on Christmas break? And I'm like, I went to Argentina and got married in a courthouse. And they're like, what?
But my wife is still down there.
My wife's in Argentina. And tidbit, now all your listeners will know this, but I was married 6 months before I consummated my marriage. So I'm going to do two truths and a lie. That's one I always throw out there. But
there you go.
I'm a saint, essentially.
Yes.
We made up for lost time, fair to say. Got married. My wife had never been to the U.S., moved into a condo in Wilmington, lived there for our first couple of years of school, or first couple of years of marriage, and then started looking at, like, do I go to seminary? Do I not? Do we just straight go to the mission field? And was led to go to Southeastern Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and started doing a general MDiv in Christian ministry. It was a really good experience. Listened to a guy named J.D. Greer in Chapel. He pastors a large church called The Summit there in Raleigh-Durham, and he talked about his experience doing this degree where you also go overseas. So I started looking into it, praying through it, and went and met with the head of the department once we moved to the Raleigh area, left the coast, and said, hey, where would I go, like my class, if we were to switch my focus? And he said, you would go to South Asia or Southeast Asia. And I remember looking at him and saying, my geography is not great. Is India
Where is India?
in one of those places?
My wife wants to go to India.
And he kind of laughed, said, India's most of South Asia. And so I knew, like, I couldn't go home and tell my wife that would be where we go if I didn't mean what I told her years before when we first started our relationship. And so, and even looking back, like, we didn't know when. I made her no promise. I just said, we will one day go. I don't know how long we'll go. I don't know when we'll go. We thought maybe much later in life. And so how God was just orchestrating all of these steps on, this is where you go to school, and then you'll switch your degree. And so that led us on this couple-year journey where I was studying an MDiv and international church planting. And then we were in a cohort through the Summit Church, and then went with the International Mission Board and served over in India for a couple of years. And so I don't know if we may stop there. I know I've filled you with a lot.
That's great. And that's, I love if you hadn't gone to Argentina, you would never have gone to India. And
Where were you guys, and what kind of ministry were you doing?
So we were up in the northeast area of India. My wife's focus was actually in our city, helping rescue women from the red light district, which is a pretty big, I guess, industry you'd say over there, and just helping rescue women out of that. She was doing some art therapy with them. My focus was church planting, equipping nationals in an area that was about 4 hours from where we lived. And so it was still considered at that time, may still be the most concentrated area of lostness on the planet. It's where India at that time, and may still be, is the least reached country in the world. And we were in the least reached area of India as far as where we were trying to see churches get started. And so I was going and driving by myself into these villages and meeting, hey, we hear there's a pastor in this one place, and I would meet with that person, and they would usually be kind of in the hub of a city, and they'd say, okay, we'll take you out to these villages. And a lot of 0 to 1 of just going, like, there's no Christian over here that we know of, and we want to see someone become a Christian, and then we're going to equip them to go plant a church in that place. And so
language barrier? Like, do you have an interpreter? Did you learn the language?
So lots of language spoken there. English is very prevalent, so it's kind of a crutch depending on how you look at international missions. And so it was hard for me not to fully get ingrained in learning the language. I worked with a language group that was called Angika, so it wasn't even one of the primary languages. So I had a translator who would travel with me, who lived in my city, who also wanted to get to know the training that we were working with. And I said, hey, just how you get to know it, travel with me, and you be the voice piece for this and the face of this. And so we got to see God do some really cool things. Got to see 6 churches start the last 6 months we were there. And 2 of those went on to be 4th generation, which is when they really say that movement's getting tracked. And the face of it was all nationals, though, which was great. And I think really a healthy way that it should be, that I was just the behind the scenes kind of circus act. Like, I got to go into these villages and attract 30 to 50 people and then turn it over to my national brother and say, but he's the guy you want to talk to. He's the guy he's the guy with all the answers.
What? How long were you there?
We were there for 2 years.
And what years were those?
2012, 2014.
Okay. Yeah, because there's so many. It seems like there's so many stories coming out of India of just
Even
pretty
North
miraculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just church multiplications and house churches multiplying and people coming to faith and just So that's sounds like you're part of that.
It was an incredible season. I mean, I still say to date, it was the most fruitful season of ministry I've ever had. Wow. I hope I didn't peak then, or that God didn't.
You did.
Well, what an early formative experience. If you basically finish seminary and go to like the far edges of the unreached people group is
very formative, and it was. I always like to say that others came before me who didn't experience the fruit that I got to experience. Yeah. So I always want to say there's a legacy that went before me of people who probably left the mission field early. Yeah. Or who died, and just it's funny moving to a place like Portland where I'm sure that they say it's in a lot of the harder cities in our nation, but it's like a church planter's graveyard. Mm-hmm. They said that was basically a missionary's graveyard where the area that I was working in.
Well, that's what I'm just thinking is like in a weird way, it's such good training for coming to Portland that you got this gift from God to see movement happen and to see people radically transformed.
We had this, we had this Multiply PDX gathering on a few days ago, and Brent Hoffman shared like some videos and some photos from northern India of a trip he had done there a couple of years ago, and it was just incredible. Mm-hmm. Like the
just the numbers, just the sheer numbers of people that are coming to faith, and he's like, I'm just showing up watching this stuff happen, and so. Yeah, maybe that's part of what you helped plant there, and that he gets to see.
And I learned, just learned so much, so formative. I mean, I was telling somebody this just the other day, like those years of my life, although 2 years in the grand scheme of a life is not that long, they were just 2 very informative years. In fact, my first year back was the hardest year of my life.
So tell us about that. When did you come back, and what was the journey to Portland?
Yeah, so one other quick thing I want to note on that, I'm preaching through Acts right now, which is really cool, as you both will know as pastors, that like you're seeing the gospel expand. Yes, it starts with these apostles, but it's really through everyday people, unknown evangelists. I'm one of the chapters I'm getting into closer to the middle of Acts this week, and it's like that's exactly what we're seeing in places like India. Like these aren't names that they'll never be on a podcast most likely, and probably not going to read a book that they've written. But man, like the gospel is spreading as God is just working and Spirit is moving. So we came back 2014. There was some circumstance when we fulfilled our commitment. We actually thought we'd be there 5 years, or even potentially what they call career as a lifelong. So there were some just numerous factors that led us coming back. It was really confusing on us because of that. So we moved back to North Carolina, stayed with my parents for probably a month, and then I moved back. We had bought a townhome that we rented out while we were overseas, and moved back into a house with no furniture. I had no job. I remember sleeping on a crib mattress for a few days and just being like, really, God? Like this is what's going to happen? So that first year back, it was hard in many levels. One was just adjusting to church culture. We had left a really massive church, and I'm not I'm pro-church, just to be clear, like all forms of church, as long as it's actually centered on Jesus and the Bible. But we came back to this massive church of thousands of people, and it was like the people we knew at the campus we were at before, they were all somewhere else, and so it was like, we were treated like visitors. We're like, you're not praying for us? Like you sent us out, So it was
you
just
were
like,
our supporting church.
You were our supporting church. So it just really messed with us in that way. And then I found myself working at a Stumptown coffee counter in a bean to bar chocolate factory, which was a really good smelling job and a fun job. But it was me going like, God, what are you doing? Like I wouldn't have articulated it at that time, but my posture was, God, I'm like varsity level now. Like I went and served in India. Like nobody at that time, like nobody wanted to go to India.
Right.
Like we wanted to go there, and you did some incredible things, but now like you kind of owe me. And where's the ministry position that you're supposed to give me? Yeah. And I found myself, as a barista, which is that's fine if you're a barista, but that's not just where I had felt like I was at in life and what I wanted to do. And so I just remember coming to the end of myself and God saying, what if you're a barista the rest of your life? Am I enough?
Yep.
And eventually saying yes. So that was really it was kind of like, let me think on that, God. Let me get back to you after another shot of espresso, and I'll let you know.
But it's funny, like most of the people that were in ministry or missionaries or something that then go into something else, they're like, I'm talking about Jesus just as much as I was before, you know?
Yeah, that's
like,
true. Yeah.
you know.
Yep. What was interesting is I found myself there. Stumptown, as you know, is from here. And it was the only Stumptown coffee counter in North Carolina at the time.
Nice.
And then I'm working with several people that are from Portland, Oregon, where I don't know what it's called now, West Side, a Jesus Church or a Jesus Church or whatever that's called now, had sent a large team to start a church in Cary, North Carolina, which is right next to Raleigh, and they were working at this Stumptown coffee counter.
Funny.
And so I remember being like, "You're from Portland," and Portland wasn't really that. It was very little on my radar at that point.
Yeah.
I'll back up real briefly. I was at a Muslim background believer's baptism in India, last baptism I attended. And a guy that's from here actually asked me, "What are you going to do when you go back?" And I said, "I don't know, something with church planting."
Yeah.
And he said, "I think you should pray about going where I'm from." And I said, "Where's that?" He said, "Portland, Oregon." I was like, "Okay, I know California's like the really big state. I don't know if Oregon's on the top or Washington."
Yeah.
I would take offense to that now myself, but I'm like, I don't know
else
which
is up
one.
there? Yeah.
So I didn't think a whole lot about it. And then I'm like working with all these people and being like, "Oh, Portland, why'd you guys move here?" Like, we moved here to start a church, which I thought, okay, that's really strange.
That's interesting.
Usually
Yeah.
it's the
Other direction.
the other direction, the opposite way. And then I went and met with a pastor who I grew up under and who had pastored this church in North Carolina for almost 30 years. And I said, "Hey, I'm feeling called to go start a church at some point." This is all while I'm having this identity crisis, but also like, I'm pretty sure this is going to be part of it. He says, where do you feel called to go? And I really wanted to go to Denver, Colorado. Denver was my number one, mountains and sunshine.
Yeah.
And so I remember he kind of looked at us and went, "Denver would be really good because there's a lot of needs there." He goes, "But I think you should consider going and praying about it." I said, "No, where?" He goes, "Portland, Oregon." And I remember thinking, okay, God, I've heard that twice now from two different people who don't know each other. And he went to Western Seminary in the early 80s and hasn't been back to Portland since then.
Wow.
But has kept up with the needs and the growth and just knew that there would be a need here. And he said, if I could go back and as someone who's about to retire at that time, because if I could go back as a young family and start fresh in ministry, I would go somewhere like Portland and plant my family and get rooted and do life in ministry there. And so I kind of started the next phase of chapter of like pursuing what would that look like.
Where to go? So this might be a little bit of an awkward question, but I think it's relevant. So that question that you were led to or found yourself asking of, if I'm a barista for the rest of my life, is God enough for me? How old were you when that question landed?
29.
Okay.
28, 29.
Okay. Yeah. That's great. That's young. And I think that's formative.
Yeah.
And it's a grace in a sense, because if you get that when you're 35, 40, 50, 60, that's a different. And so to wrestle through that at that age in preparation, I mean, clearly it's like God had you in training, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to work through that deep question and to come, like you said, come to the end of yourself.
Yep.
And then to go, okay, now you're ready.
Yeah. But you can't see it in the moment.
Yeah.
Oh gosh,
You
no,
have to go through it.
Yeah. But I think it's a grace, and it's like, hey, how do you want to respond to this at 29 or 30? Because it could be like, oh, you're not ready. And then to come back 5 years or a decade later and go, okay, you ready now? Because I think as men, and I've never been a woman, so I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but as men to journey through that, wrestle through ego and some of that stuff is
First
so
half of life,
critical.
second half of life.
Gosh. Well, and it's so, those are the forks in the road, right? And so thanks for answering that. But I think that's
that we've been talking a lot about the City to City podcast and been on a couple calls with folks. And John Thomas, one of the people on there, he would always ask us, like that's his favorite interview question. Or for someone that's like gonna plant a church in New York or gonna plant a church somewhere, where have you failed?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, like if a young man is gifted, he'll go right through Bible college, go right through seminary, crush it, do so well, and then just be, I'm 27, I'm 28, I'm ready to plant a church. But then, and I don't sense like, oh, that was a huge failure. It was just kind of like a what's next, God? Like, and you had to deal with some of those big questions, but it was like, yeah, it's like, there's something about that if you have, if God hasn't accommodated all your wishes and hopes and dreams and the timeline that you wanted, it's such a growth experience to be like, it's him, it's not me.
well, and you've already shared now a couple things that prepared you to be able to plant and not just plant, but last in Portland, because that's one of the
persevere.
things you've been in Portland how long, Pete?
Pretty much same time, about 8.5 years.
8.5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I didn't plan. I mean, I stepped into a healthy church culture, it's been amazing.
Oh, so it's been really easy for you to pastor in Portland. I don't think it's been easy.
But my goodness, I hear horror stories.
Well,
and it's challenging in all the ways you'd expect it to be.
Even
but
whether you're planting or leading and existing. I guess I've got a little bit of time. I've been here almost 18 years. And so to see, and you've seen in 8.5, and you've seen in 8.
Almost 8, yeah.
You've seen those that don't last. And not to judge at all, but just to survey the story that is in Portland, that you had some really formative experiences that prepared you to last 8 now plus years. Now you'll keep going. You're not. You don't have any sense of like you're
announcing on the podcast.
No, you're not. You're here. Because 8 years is a ton of time, and there's some. We were joking.
I had very little gray in my beard. And I promise I had a little bit more hair.
Well, and think of how little your kids were when you got here too. This is all that they've known. I mean, in some sense,
for sure. Well, and so I said that I wouldn't have gone to India if I hadn't gone to Argentina, and I wouldn't have come to Portland if I hadn't gone to India. Or I wouldn't have lasted, I would say, in Portland.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Right. Yeah, because there are that identity piece when you come with all of the, Spirit-given vision for making a kingdom impact and planting a church is all good. But when you haven't wrestled through that identity piece and you realize the tough road that Portland is, tough ground, tough soil, that is
so
one of the
everyone
things
watching that's thinking about coming to Portland, you must go to India first.
Or just to widen it out, you must fail and deepen your identity and self-awareness before coming. Right. So, because this is a brutal way to do that. And there are stories that have done that in here. There are leaders who can say like, oh, I came and God did that work in me. And either I moved on to another city or I was able to stay because whatever, there's all different.
I sometimes find myself asking myself, am I the village idiot? And what I mean by that is I see those who came before me who aren't here anymore.
Sure.
And I see those kind of like what I consider my class. And this is different networks, different denominations, but who you kind of all find each other. And then every year you're like, oh, there goes another. I mean, a guy just back in December, and his church had already been shut down for several years, but he was still here. And he was like, hey, I'm leaving. Yeah. And I was like, it's like one more like, not fallen in the sense of like sinful, but just like fallen soldier. Like they're gone. I won't have that fellowship with that person. And then many have come after I arrived, and also the kind of the same thing. And I'm like, you're like, why are you still here? I'm like, I don't know. Am I the village idiot? Like, I don't know what they saw and got out whenever there was a time. Because I'm pretty transparent, and this is being recorded, but during COVID year, which I know we haven't addressed too much, but there was a part of me that really wanted to get out. And I thought, I don't have to hang my head too low. Everyone can kind of go, hey.
Everyone would get it.
A pandemic hit, like, you didn't have that in your 5-year perspective.
Right, no.
We don't blame you. And so I remember just like being like, kind of like antsy, like, is this it? Can I exit stage left and go on my way? And here I am in 2025.
Yes, glad you didn't. I know.
I think you're probably the only pastor who asked that question. So I have not heard it. I'm not aware of anyone else who's asked
Tim,
that.
statistically, that's not correct.
Have you seen other data on that? I don't know. I think all of us.
But I think
sure.
like I have felt so much the growth out of that time of at least on the east side of Portland.
Yeah.
Like God is doing something just amongst the leaders. There's encouragement and like Dave Martin shared in prayer this week of like, if a lot of times it feels like the wave is out in Portland and now the wave's kind of coming back in and it just feels like fresh.
Absolutely.
And like we're just seeing like so many young people come to Christ and just seeing a lot of things encouraging.
Yeah.
And so
and like you said, you got to see some of that in India and you're aware of there was others before you that were planting the seeds. And I think that's some of what it is like there's decades long of people that have been praying and like, so clearly some overlap. I can remember being a much younger pastor here and just being like wide-eyed and excited and all this. And then meeting a pastor who's pastored for 35 years down the street. I'm like, oh man, I don't know anything. Like we need to listen to this guy and take notes and to hear the stories and then to see the little rays of light of God showing up in significant ways. And so I think that's
And Lord, forgive me for like judging someone that was there for 30 years and their church was only 150 people or something. You know, like the 28-year-old version of me just knew nothing about how faithful that was, how beautiful it is, how amazing it is to pastor a church for decades and decades and like see fruit of that. And
this is kind of side note, but I can remember this was 16 years ago, sitting in a meeting. It was one of the first kind of huddles up of leaders, pastors that has now become
this.
Well,
Pastors PDX
together PDX.
Together PDX.
And so Kevin Palau had pulled together some leaders, and I can remember not knowing what I was even invited to, and showed up and was sitting there and met. I'm really sorry that I'm gonna mess up this name. Maybe you can help me out, Pete, or Probosco, pastor. I'm gonna blank his name. African American pastor who's I'm probably 40 years now. This was he was there close to 30, I think, and this was 16 years ago. So he's probably over 40 years. And I can just remember I'd been in town about 2 years and walked into this meeting, and I knew a few of the guys, and I was like, oh, okay. And then like there was probably a half dozen African American pastors in the room who had pastored for decades and just had this like wonderful and humiliating moment of going like, oh, I don't know anything about Portland. You guys know about Portland. And to hear them talk about the work that they had been involved in and what they'd seen happen and the story of Portland that I was oblivious to still at that time, and just humbled and going like, okay, I need to follow you around. I need to walk in your shadow and take notes from you and listen to wisdom that you've earned. Like just, it was a great moment, but that's, so to think through their eyes, what they've been praying for and the seeds that they've been planting and
what they spent their life on. You know what I mean? What they dedicated their life to.
Yeah,
so beautiful.
100%. Yeah. I think too, just side note, you shared earlier about coming back to North Carolina from India after 2 years. And so if you're listening to this and you're somebody who was in Portland and then left, just know like God's used that in some way, in formative way. So that's not a waste, either for Portland or for you as an individual. And so not to belittle that at all, but to honor that and to.
I never throw judgment or shade on those. It's more of just a like, oh man, I wish they were still here.
Oh, I was saying it for stuff I said, not you said, just to be clear. So I was saying it to myself.
There's a book called Church in the Making. One of you ever read that?
No.
It's a church planting book that wasn't ever that popular for some reason, but one of the best ones I've read since I moved here. It was a planter who actually shut his church down. He's now up in Idaho and planted a church. But so you need to read this book. And it was as he was leaving, because as many people as I know church planters who shut their churches down or leave, and usually it's kind of, they go hand in hand. I try to meet with them before they leave, because I want to know what... I might be you next, but it's kind of like, let me have an exit interview. Like, what led to the decision? I know all the pains and the ups and downs and the trials. Was it the family dynamic? But I always want to know, but also as a way to encourage them. And that book basically talked about that idea that there is no failure in the sense like you've planted seeds, or you've watered seeds that were planted before, or you've tilled the ground. We're coming up on gardening season here, and so you've somewhere, you don't know what part of that what role you've played in that neighborhood, right? And so then, another church planter might move in, never knowing your name or knowing anything you did, but they may have reached X amount of people, and the people they were discipling, the people that they saw come to Christ and that they saw baptized. And so it's all used, we're all ultimately on the same team, and when they won't have all these local expressions, it's just easy for us to forget that in the...
I had a amazing donor who just had such a great heart for just maturity and wisdom. And you feel like, because my church in New York, it merged with another church, like when we moved out here, and just feeling, the disappointment of that, even like the shame of that, like, oh, I wish we would have gone on, or I wish they would have called someone else to continue it. And she was just like, I wasn't giving to you. I was giving I was giving to the kingdom, and look at all those. Yes. And she had been able to come and worship with us a couple of times and just like see what God was doing. But it was like, it was so comforting to be like, there's a purpose for that. Like if your church lasts for 1 year, like there's God fulfills the purpose. And
I had to look up his name because I was butchering it.
Yes, thank you.
Richard Probasco.
Cool.
New Song Community Church. And so if you've been around Portland for any amount of time, you probably know his name. And he's got, there's just
nice.
Legacy, right? Like,
Yeah.
And I don't know him well personally, met him a few times, but and he was again one of about a half dozen, but those people that have been around for decades. And okay, so tell us what planted in Portland. What was the kind of the process of that? And then you've already mentioned it, but you planted a couple years before COVID, and now you've been here a couple years after. So
so definitely, as anyone, did things I would do differently. If you're
let's start there.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're considering parachuting in,
start taking notes.
Don't do that.
Did you have a long runway or not?
Yes and no. I guess it depends on as far as like fundraising.
Did you feel pressure? Were anybody supporting you, being like, "We'd love to see you launch in 1 year"?
Not really that.
Okay.
And in fact, this
That's
all kind of
good.
ties into why we're still here.
Yeah.
My wife and I would say that we came in with a missionary heart and posture first.
Good.
With the goal of part of being missionaries to see a church start.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're still here. Going back, I really don't think if I had gone to India that I wouldn't still be here, just because of what we experienced there and what we got to see with our national brothers and sisters there. And I remember someone asking me, I had been here for 6 months. I was back in North Carolina and trying to get churches to give us money. And they're like, what does success look like? And I was like, oh no, they were like, they're looking for a number. And I remember just thinking on it for a few minutes. I know it's going to sound super spiritual, but this was my genuine answer. And I said, I think it's faithfulness and obedience until God calls us to go somewhere else. And they were like, okay, we can get behind that.
Good.
Because I was thinking there were like 200 people or
Right,
baptisms.
right.
And I still think that that's what has continued to sustain us being here is, all right, and we've had those seasons. Okay, God, is this a time for us to go elsewhere? And if so, where else? And I have had opportunities. Hey, would you move to this place or would you consider this? And a couple of those I've even said, all right, here's my application or here's my resume, and then it shuts. It's like, no, it's not where God wants us to be. To be here. But as far as our process, so we moved here summer 2017. So that's why we'll come up on 8 years in June. My wife, it was our 10-year anniversary, and she said, I really want to go to Europe. And I said, instead, we're going to drive across the country and move
Similar.
to Portland. It's similar. My kids at that time were 2, getting ready to turn 5 or just to turn 5 and like 7. So now they're 9, getting ready to turn 12 and 14. So the kids are very rooted here. I mean, they are Oregonians, they're Portlanders. When I mentioned other, it's like, this is home. And so they don't really know, especially younger two, don't really know anything else. And so that summer we said, like, let's just take at least the summer, but most of the first, that half of 2017 to learn, like, what does it mean to be an Oregonian? What does it mean to be a Portlander? And we think we know what it means in some cases. Because we've researched a little bit and watched Portlandia.
I was going to say, because you watched Portlandia.
We watched Portlandia, and I was like, I guess I can wear women's clothing when I go out of the house and go to coffee shops and do different things. But we watched some of those episodes, and you get here, and then you experience like the magic of summer. You're like, oh my goodness, there's a festival every neighborhood. At least 2017, there's a festival.
So beautiful.
There's concerts in the parks, and there's just always something new, something going on. And I always say you can trick anyone to move here in the summer. Days are so long, they're so nice, and you're like, is it like this all the time? And I mean, for the first couple months for us, it was. We're like, I think so. This place is incredible. And so we just started, meeting neighbors, meeting people, started attending neighborhood board meetings, neighborhood association meetings, just to put our name out there, and then met a couple couples who joined us pretty quickly on who wanted to be part of the church. That didn't last very long. In the end, they didn't like the city of Portland, and so they bailed on us. And then, I think it was 2018. By that time, we gathered. I mean, it was small, but gathered enough people that we said, "Hey, we were meeting our house, just kind of felt more like house church or core group meetings, whatever you want to call them in that sense." And then we had a meeting at Kennedy School. If you know where Kennedy School is, they have a community room there, and so we had our first Easter service there. Easter Bunny showed up. We did not hire Easter Bunny, but Easter Bunny was at the Kennedy School.
Okay.
And I just remember this lady sticking her head in, and she was like, this place is so interesting. There's a brewery here. There's a cigar bar. There's a soaking pool, a hotel. And there's some church meeting over there. Like that we were there.
That's cool.
All the time. And so, that was 2018. And then we never really did like a formal launch. as far as church planting language. And
That's good.
honestly, don't regret that, but I've been criticized by many for not doing that. And part of it was parachuting in, not having this team, wanting to get to know the landscape of Portland, and just not sensing that was the right dynamic per se. And that's no shade on those who have done that. But
How'd you end up in Northeast? Like, why'd you guys pick that? You just liked it the most, or?
So I came out here on like 5 different trips because although I know the summer is great, I knew the other parts of the time of year are not. And so I was like, all right, God, I trust you, but I'm going to go out during the winter and during the spring, during the fall. So multiple trips. And I will say this, I actually didn't want to move to Portland. Even after, so Denver was my radar. I came out here on a trip on, I guess it'll be 10 years ago this coming October with my wife and explored the city. It was great, right? We had a lot of fun, ate Pips Donuts and had some good coffee and went to Pals and it was just like, this is fun. And saw the need for sure, but left here going, no, I'm not going to Portland. Like I still want to go to Denver. And then we started seeking the Lord, praying. By the end of that year, it was like, all right, if it would be our will and our desire not to go there. God clearly wants us in Portland. And then, so over the next 2 years, came out on multiple trips. And I remember I think it was one of my very last trips here. My wife only got to come out twice, and she was on that trip. And I was at Hot Lips Pizza on Sandy Boulevard, which is not Hot Lips anymore. And I can always eat, but I just remember the person we were meeting with, a guy named Wes Hughes, if either one of you know Wes, but he was just asking, like, what's the Spirit leading you in?
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I want to get the heck out of here and never come back.
Yeah.
And it was just this, and part of this is my background. I grew up Baptist, and my wife grew up Pentecostal, and so I didn't know how to articulate it. And later when I shared it, she's like, you're dealing with spiritual warfare. And I was like, oh, because I always felt like if you ever watched the show Lost, there was like that dark cloud.
Yeah.
When I came to Portland, I felt like the dark cloud was like hovering around the city, and so I really didn't want to come here. And I don't know how I got back. I backtracked a little bit there, but eventually we said yes and came here.
Came to Northeast.
Northeast. So Northeast. Every time we came out, I would meet with many church planters or pastors that would just, where would you plant? Where'd you go? And most of them said at that time, just get a map, throw a dart, and wherever it lands. And so they were like, "There's that much need."
I've
like,
not heard that.
Okay, that's what everyone told me. So I said, "Okay." But,
I've heard other people say that.
and then a couple of people we
Who
were
said
working.
that? Seriously?
many people said that. And so a couple of people that I was meeting with, Wes was one of them. Was taking me to a couple of different neighborhoods, and they were looking at like Selwood, which I probably shouldn't say this. I'm just glad I didn't go there. There was just some like southeast and the north, and I noticed that it seemed like there was more well-established churches south of Burnside. So I canceled out south pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then it looked like Northeast, which I know you pastored for a long time in Northeast, but it looked like Northeast had some, but less than Southeast for sure.
Yeah.
And it seemed like at that time, even back in 2015, they weren't really showing people anything on the east of east of 82nd. It was still kind of like very much like, that's kind of like the barrier.
That's the outer edge of Portland.
Outer edge of Portland.
Yes.
People are starting to move out of the way because it's a little bit more affordable.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, very quick, I was like, okay, we're going to go north of Burnside.
Someone was saying to me this week that there's like west of 82nd, it's like a magnet, just like draws everything. Like the resources and then like east, because we're trying to do more stuff in East Multnomah County with different stuff.
Which I could see. Yeah. So then we was like, just narrow it down as far as where we landed in Northeast. And I still actually look back and I'm like, yes, there were some, but even where you're pastor at Mosaic, I don't think you guys were saying like, oh, we're reaching all of Northeast. We got it. And so as we kind of looked around, I'm like, I think there was a genuine need.
Yeah.
Not to the degree of east of 82nd even still, but that there was more of a need at that time than I would even say there are or is now looking at it. And so then it was kind of here's kind of our general area. And then when you move in, you're like, where can we rent a house? And at that time, it was like so hard to get a rental and we didn't buy right away. And so some of those things I would probably do differently now, but believe it was where we were supposed to land at the time. But I've advocated now for others when they say, now would you tell others to plant a church? I'm like, east of 82nd.
Yeah.
There's some area, and we're seeing some of that. Praise God.
Yeah. Yep. Anchor Church at 122nd and Stark just started up a couple months ago.
Yep. Yeah.
They took over the old Big Five there.
Really?
Yeah. Which Portland Rescue Mission purchased, I believe, and so they're kind of Yeah.
Yeah, skate
And that's
church,
kind of
skate churches in
skate
that
church
building.
is there. It's kind of an offshoot of Door of Hope, but it's not. It doesn't have the Door of Hope name.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
And
It's
one
exciting.
of the first things that you were the one who asked the question, but this kind of goes back to your story. One of the best things that I did when I moved into the neighborhood where I did is I started prayer walking and biking around
Yeah.
and saw other church buildings. And it's quickly to going back to what we were saying earlier, like, oh, they've been here for so long, they haven't done anything, or just assume their theology's bad. And maybe it is, but you don't, it's easy to do that without ever knowing. So I remember I just went up to this church. It was called Genesis Community Fellowship and knocked on the door, and a guy named Donald Frazier, Pastor Frazier, opened the door and he goes, hey, can I help you? I said, yeah, I just moved into the neighborhood. I'm a church planter, but this is your neighborhood. You've been pastoring here. I'd love to learn from you. It's one of the best things that I did.
Way to
just
go.
struck up a good like relationship. Because I had thankfully learned enough, even where I moved from, that it's like, church planter comes in and get out of the way. Let me show you how it's done. And it was like, no, I don't think that's the right posture. Let me just go in. So what he told me, he was getting closer to retirement. He said, look, I'm too tired and old to get to know the new neighborhood. He goes, the new neighborhood looks like you. He goes, you get to go to the new neighborhood and tell me what it's like, and I'll tell you about the old neighborhood and the history of the neighborhood. And just built up this really, I mean, he still reaches out to me every several months to this day.
Cool.
So built up a really good relationship just to learn, and I was able to preach there before, in the past when he was still there. That's
cool, man.
That served me really well.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah.
So.
Man. Well, there's a story there too, right? With him and his church. And you think about that, like the long-term perspective. And you mentioned this earlier of the donor that was giving with a vision bigger than one logo, right?
Yeah.
One church, that you serve a people and have an impact, and they form a community, and God does things. And then that story kind of continues on, and then the new has to come. So for an established church leader to have a kingdom perspective of, man, glad, welcome you, because I think there are contexts where it's like, oh, this is my territory. You go 2 zip codes over. And that's not, I just don't think that that's a kingdom perspective. And so it's hey, invite you in, let's be brothers, and I can kind of help you and point you, and how can I support you? And I mean, that's a great vision. I think. So you're kind of doing that a little bit now. You've been here 8 years. You've got, tell us a little bit about the new kind of ministry that you're a part of, an extension of here in Portland, and what you're doing and what you're hoping to see, and how that kind of dovetails with God's work throughout the city here. Yeah.
So I took on a role at the end of last year with a group in Texas called GC2, Great Commission, Great Commandment. People like Texas, but you're in Portland. So essentially, they a number of years ago started supporting churches in, really it's the West Coast, but my primary role was focusing on the PNW. So it could be Spokane, could be Seattle, could be Portland. Obviously, the larger cities are going to get the most focus, but anything in between that.
Great.
Yeah.
So there was a couple different people in this role. I took on the role, and so trying to come alongside those who are starting churches and partner with them to help get some more resources, to help get some churches in Texas. As probably no surprise, churches there are generally larger. They also have larger budgets, and there's many who have a heart to just see other areas of the country reached. And so just able to play this role of, hey, are you starting a church, and come along other networks, which is kind of nice. To me, I mean, you're talking about the Redeemer podcast and that story. Like, to me, for even Multiply PDX in Portland to get to where it needs to be, it needs to be multi-networked, multi-denomination, all of us figuring out where we can work together and working together as often as possible. And so to me, it was like, man, this is kind of a strategic role. It also gives me, I think you'll both get this as pastors, like it's given me an outlet outside of just myself and my church. It's very easy to be focused on Sojourn and what we're doing. And very much a lot of my week is still that. But to go, hey, what are you doing? Hey, can we come alongside you? And can we make this connection happen to help see more movement here in our area?
Well, and one of the ways, because that can get kind of sensitive, that you're doing stuff beyond your church, right? But so many churches, even today, so many churches in Portland, Vancouver, metro area, and I'll just assume the rest of the Pacific Northwest, are not involved in church planting or church multiplication in any way.
Yeah.
And if you ask them, they would tell you, we want to someday. And so even you, now granted, you've got missionary and planting experience and all of that, but you having a toe in a wider work brings vision for church planting and church multiplication into Sojourn.
Yeah.
And just, so whether folks are affirming you or not, I just, cheer for you. And I just think it's such a great thing. And that's, so that's exciting to hear.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And because people are, once again, I say things I probably shouldn't say when they're being recorded, but when someone says, hey, I want to move there and plant a church, part of me goes, no, let me meet with you and stop you from doing it, or at least let me learn from my mistakes.
Good.
Don't parachute in, don't do this.
Yeah.
And then also let me help connect you with some resources.
So
if possible.
important.
If I told you had to get a job and just work here for 3 years, would you still do it? Stuff like that. Just because the more you absorb and learn, and
one of the things I would love
you-
to see, and
So true.
we can cut this out if we need to, but with Multiply PDX, there's a lot of collaboration in the city of Portland, and I think one of the things I would love to see is how do we form. So you take a guy like myself who's moving from the other side of the country. And I think it's like the challenges are our denominations and our networks not wanting to work together on that level. And maybe we all are, but how do we create a longer runway to where it's not just you have the long runway, but hey, we've got a long runway and we've got a great church that's willing to partner with you for you to call an apprenticeship or residency, or even if you've had one on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Our challenge was we have a really strong sending church on the East Coast and partnering churches. But there's a disconnect when you fly from the East Coast all the way southeast to where then people here, I would meet with pastors here and early on and go, hey, I'd love to come and like do a residency or whatever you want to call it. You send us out. And they're like, we don't know you, which makes, I get that. They don't know you, but I'm like, but they know me and they've advocated for. So like, I'm trying to figure out this, like, how do we create this thing? I'm determined that that's one of my purposes here.
Yes.
And how do we make that happen and go, oh, you're more reformed? Well, cool. Let me introduce you to Pete and Parkland Reformed. Like, this might be a good fit for you.
Yeah.
Hey, you're more this. This might be a good fit for you. And just where we can really actually help each other. Yeah. So we have less of the stories of the people leaving because they felt like they actually were cared for, had some maybe people who went out with them. And
not alone.
Not alone.
And that's the, man, there's several things. We don't have it like finalized yet, but we're trying to get to, if there was 3, 4, or 5 things that we could collectively say, we agree with these things. If you're going to plant, you need to be assessed. You need to have a support base. One of those is embed. Yeah. Residency, whatever, partner with a church. And then,
you need to have a coach probably.
A coach. Yeah. And maybe there's another one or something. But what are those things that we just, look, this is the story that we've seen and we can glean from these lessons over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And as you're saying that, I was remembering part of the story that was Mosaic was, it was planted to be a church planting church. And while I was there, we were able to plant 5 churches in the city. And one of those was some guys from Texas that came fully funded for 5 years, fully assessed, logo printed, website up, all just looked awesome, ready to go, landed and started meeting people. And they were humble enough when we said, hey, we'd love to host you and come embed with us, but we would want to assess you. And they're from, and I'm not going to quote it because I don't have their permission, but they were from one of the best church planting, sending schools and churches in the U.S.
Wow.
And so we could have trusted them, but what we had agreed on how we were going to do it was we would do assessment. And they were humble enough to go through our assessment after spending a year in school and raising support and clarifying a vision and all of it. And then they ended up actually changing their name because their name would have been silly. Yeah. And they changed it to one, and then spent a year embedded and then planted out, and we sent people with them and they went and planted. And again, as we've been talking, it was one that went for, I think it went for about 10 or 12 years. Okay. And was great and has a great story and legacy, and then closed. But that's the story that is like, so when you talk about parachuting in And which you didn't. I mean, you parachuted in, but you knocked on Don's door and said, "Hey, I'm a church planner. Help me." And that kind of partnership and shared mission.
I think it's so good to hear a story like that, because I feel like you less often do hear that. And I think even when I look at my own like runway and partner churches and fundraising, like you can build that into your however many year plan.
Right.
And just knowing, hey, what we're going to do is actually we're trying to network with the church, and they're going to, and hey, we're going to go through their assessment or whatever it is, And I think I think most of your donors on the other side would get on board with that, but you got to have those opportunities.
You said something early on in our conversation about coming to Portland as missionaries, and you lived it because you were in a foreign country, and so many either have that concept or idea. But that is so important, and to come and, because it's one thing to say it. Well, actually, it's two different things to say I'm going to come plant a church, and I'm going to come and with a missionary mindset and learn the context and learn the culture, prayer walk, meet people, build relationships,
see what's going to make disciples.
Right? Yeah. And then it's that old, like, you can, what is the line? You can plant a church and you may get disciples, but if you make disciples, you will get a church. That whole thing.
Yeah.
So.
Mike Breen, thank you.
There you go, Mike Breen. Good.
Yeah, that's just even that idea that if God hasn't promised how Sojourn, the story of like He's not giving me the end picture, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to your point, like it may not make it or it may, but let's just say that I did announce today we're shutting it down, which we're not. But if God hasn't called us to move on, we can still be here as missionaries.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Beautiful. Serving.
You could pivot,
Pivot, serve in another capacity, serve in another church, find a different vocation as far as where I'm getting paid from.
Yeah.
But to still be here.
Yeah.
And I think my heart is, I think this really does go back to seminary and even India, is like, I want every Christian to function in that way.
Yes. Yeah. Because the calling doesn't change, right?
The calling doesn't change.
Yeah. No, Eugene Peterson was like, go to the church that's closest to your house and stay there as long as you can.
Yep.
Like that is just like that faithful presence. And I mean, that's really different than how maybe most American evangelicals kind of think about church mission, discipleship. Yeah.
Matt, for what it's worth, thank you for the 8 years that you've planted and led here. And it is so good to hear your story, your heart, your journey, how God's formed you and forming you. And it's a privilege to feel like we're linked arms for the kingdom here. And thanks for letting everybody that listens just hear and glean from your story and wisdom. And so thanks for leading Sojourn Church here in Northeast Portland, and for being the regional representative and leader for GC2, and excited to be teaming together.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Tim, for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.
Thanks for going ahead of guys like myself and paving the way.
And following others. Went before us. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com, where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.